Okay, Marlo here. On the homepage of logicproanswers.com, there's a post called What Would You Like to See? Here you can leave a question and I'll record a video trying to answer the question for a limited time only. And Justin has a question. He says, I'm running Rewire through a MIDI track. It runs just fine but won't play back any audio. The inputs, outputs all look correct. Any suggestions? Turns out Justin's running Pro Tools and Reason, so what we'll do is we'll set up a Pro Tools session that we can use as a template to run Pro Tools to control Reason through Rewire. We'll go Pro Tools, File, New Session. We'll create a new session. Call it Reason Template. We'll just save it on the desktop in this case. We'll go Command-Shift-N and we'll create 4 audio tracks. We'll create 4 of each. 4. These should be stereo. 4 instrument tracks. 4 MIDI tracks, and we'll create a master fader. Now while we're at it, we'll create a click track. Next thing we'll do is launch Reason. And since Pro Tools is already open, Reason should launch in Rewire mode. To confirm that, we'll go to Reason Preferences. And we'll look at the preferences for audio. And we can see Reason is running in Rewire mode. Now we'll also look at keyboards and control surfaces preferences. And because normally, if we were running Reason by itself, we would want Reason to see the keyboard. We have these preferences. This box used with Reason is checked, and this keyboard, in this case this little M Audio Oxygen 8, is being considered the master keyboard for Reason. Now we're going to be using MIDI tracks in Pro Tools to trigger and play the instruments in Reason, so we don't want to get MIDI notes double triggering. So to avoid that, we'll uncheck this box that says Use with Reason, and we'll also click this button that says Use No Master Keyboard. Now Pro Tools is going to be using the keyboard, but Reason will not independently be trying to play MIDI notes of Reason devices, which we'll add to the rack. We'll add 4 devices, the Thor, the Maelstrom, an NN19, and a redrum. And then we'll go and add an instrument to each of these, or a sound to each of these Reason instruments. And for the redrum, we'll add a drum kit. In this case, try this one. So we have 4 instruments. We'll hit the tab key and turn the rack around in Reason, and we can see that in the hardware interface, Audio I/O, the Thor is already hardwired to outputs 1 and 2. So we'll take the Maelstrom and we'll run the outputs of Maelstrom to audio outputs 3 and 4. And then we'll take the outputs of the NN19 and we'll run those to 5 and 6. And then we'll take the outputs of the redrum and we'll run those to 7 and 8. So these are the audio outputs of Reason. So Thor is going to go out on 1 and 2, Maelstrom on 3 and 4, NN19 on 5 and 6, and the redrum on 7 and 8. We'll hit tab and turn the rack back around. Now we'll go back to Pro Tools and we'll take a look at these software instrument tracks. Each one of these is going to correspond to one of our instruments in the Reason rack. So we'll name each of these. Give it the name corresponding to the Reason instrument. Redrum. And then on the MIDI tracks, we'll name the MIDI tracks the same thing, only just we'll add MIDI to the end of the name to distinguish them from the instrument tracks. NN19 MIDI and Redrum MIDI. Now we have the 4 instrument tracks and 4 MIDI tracks named according to the Reason instruments. The next thing we'll want to do is to bring up software instrument devices for Reason. Reason for each one of these software instrument tracks. So we'll do the same with the mouse drum. We'll bring up the Reason instrument, and the same with the NN19. Bring up the Reason instrument, and the same with Redrum. Bring up that Reason instrument as well. And these are on the inserts of each of these software instrument tracks. Now, the next thing we'll want to do is assign the audio channels corresponding to the audio channels on which the Reason instruments are sending through Rewire. So Thor's on 1 and 2, that corresponds to left and right. Maelstrom is on 3 and 4. We can also select the channel here. NN19 is on 5 and 6. And the Redrum is on 7 and 8. So we've got the audio channels set up. Next thing we'll need to do is set up the MIDI channels. So each one of these MIDI tracks will send out. So we'll select the output selector for each MIDI track, so that the MIDI track sends to the corresponding Reason instrument on the output. So the Redrum output will go to the Redrum. So each one of these MIDI tracks output is assigned to a Reason instrument. Now, when we arm one of these MIDI tracks and play notes, we can see that we'll be able to sequence MIDI on the MIDI track, and the audio will come back on the corresponding instrument track. And for each of these instruments, if we were to go to the Redrum, for example, we can play and sequence MIDI notes on the Redrum track. And then we can see that the audio is coming back on the software instrument track. So MIDI notes to play the Reason instrument are being sent from the MIDI track and being sequenced on the MIDI track. And the audio for the instrument is coming back on the corresponding software instrument track. Okay, brilliant. So that's how that works. Now we'll save, of course we can get rid of these MIDI notes, and we'll save this setup as a template. We've already saved it as a template previously, so I'll go save as template, and I'll call this one Reason Template 2. So now every time we want to start a new project that will use Reason instruments in this way, we can bring up our Pro Tools Reason template. In another episode, I'm going to do this whole process with Logic Pro. Okay, thanks for watching.